Today we're going to be looking at an example of how you would use Open Cider to quickly add user authentication to your new projects. So for people who don't know what Open Cider is a user authentication platform that prioritizes transparency and passwordless authentication. So we are going to be going through a Hello World example today. And we're just going to follow these steps just so we go through the demo, and then we immediately look at the code just to see exactly how you would integrate Open Cider. So the first step is creating a user account on Open Cider. This is necessary for testing. So we're just going to click here. I already have a user account, but you should be directed to an authentication process, which is relatively short, and you should be able to get this up and running within a minute or so. But yeah, having said that, go into the services tab to add your created developer service from the marketplace. In this case, for this example, the service in question is called Hello App. So we are going to be going to the services tab and using Hello App. So this is what the services tab looks like. Hello App is already added because I've been doing some testings on it. Also, an app that has been added is Bullets. You can check that out. It's a project management platform. It's free to use at the moment. Yeah. But having done that, now we move on to the third step, which is click the sign in button below to proceed with the web demo. So we're going to click this and then just get started right away. And now the OTP should be received in your inbox for whatever email you have added or used to create your user account. And I'm entering mine right now. Okay, and just like that, we've been able to successfully authenticate the user. So you can see the username, the email address, which is obviously going to be hidden because it is a real address, and the avatar of choice, which is literally just pulled details from my actual account. So the benefits of this is you're able to quickly prototype and quickly build your apps without needing to worry about user management or authentication. You just need to integrate with a very simple to use API, and then you have all this functionality available to you. Also, it promotes a lot of other benefits for the user that we're going to get into a little later in this video. But for now, we're just going to go into the code base to see exactly how this works. All right. Of utmost importance in all of this is the client. And just as a by the way, this code base is available on GitHub, so you can actually pull that and use that as a quick start. But the process essentially is the authentication process is breaking down into two steps. One is initializing and then completing of the auth. So in the first case, we're supplying the email, and in the second case, we're supplying the OTP that is associated with the email at that particular time. And then obviously we have other functions that are extended. The first is get summary data and update summary data. So summary data is like a cache storage for you to store frequently or quickly accessed data. A lot of times this would look like for people who actually write games, for example, this would look like what you would typically store in your player prefs. So using summary data means you don't have to store anything in player prefs for Unity, for example, because you just store it on Open Cider and then it's available across multiple platforms. For other apps, this could look like anything really. It could be your web settings, it could be the profile information, it could be anything. It could be XP and count. In this case, for this example, we are actually using the summary data to store the visit count and the XP. So XP is just an arbitrary value to kind of gamify the experience of this process. So having said that, we're just going to go into the code a bit. So as you see at the moment, we're using Axios, so we're making direct HTTP calls. So once you get started, start by creating a store. So just to give insight into what the store is, this is the store. This is going to be hidden, but in your case, when you create your app, it should be your service key that you have generated from the dashboard. And yeah, what we're doing essentially with this store, which is Pinia, by the way, what we're doing with this store is we are storing the email address and we're storing the OTP as well. So the intention here is to use that information later. So on initialize, we actually add the email to the store and we send an initialization request which hosts the store data. Now, if you look at this, you can see exactly what the store data looks like. It's just the service key, the email address. OTP, obviously, in this case is undefined, so it will not be sending OTP to the API. And then once it's been sent, we're simply confirming that it was successfully completed, and then we resolve that with a Boolean as well. So why it was important to do this is because of the next step. So if you look at the next step, what is happening here is we are adding the OTP, right? And then what we're doing is also saying, is the email null? So we're basically trying to use this as a way to create a blocker so we ensure that one request isn't carried out before the other. So if the email is null, that means this request has not been run at all. And in that case, we have to resolve this with a false, obviously. But if the email exists, then we're just going to send the validate. And now at this point, we would expect that the OTP is obviously defined because it's been added. And once again, we confirm if it's a success or not. So in the case that we have a successful request, we actually create a different store. So this store is a user store. And what we're doing is adding the data response to the user store. Now, the data response, I should add, is your access token. So in this place, you would expect the token that would then serve all subsequent requests. Now we fetch details. So once we've been able to successfully retrieve the access token, the next step would be to, one, get the user details, i.e. the username and email address and avatar, and then also update the summary data. So what is interesting here is, first of all, we're just going to breeze through this. This is what you would expect. We're first checking if is authenticated, and all this is saying is, does the token exist? So we want to make sure the token exists before we actually attempt to even send any request. Having done that, if the token doesn't exist, we're rejecting it with this error. But if the token exists, we're checking if the document is null. So this is just a caching technique just to make sure we don't have to go to the API every time for every request. So if the store holds the information or contains the document, the user document, we actually just return that instead. But if it doesn't contain that, then we proceed to make our call to the API service. So once we make the call successfully, we take that document and obviously we add it to the store. So the store saves that so that in subsequent calls, this should work out fine. So that's what's happening in fetch details. But the more exciting thing, I guess, is to look at the update summary data. So in this case, what we want to do is kind of track, right? So we want to say, hey, we're going to use this metrics. So there are a couple of metrics or points you can use to store your data. So the first, which is metric 0, is always going to be a string, right? So here you can store whatever you want. You can store a JSON, you can store a long string, you can store shared settings. I just wrote that here just as an example to help you understand what needs to be stored. Here and the rest of the values we are going to be storing are numeric values. Having said that, in this scenario, what we are doing specifically is visit count and XP. And these two are irrelevant. In fact, we can actually take them out. So the way it works is you are able to send at least one of these metric fields to the API, and it should work out fine. So since we're not dealing with these ones, we can actually just delete them from the code base. And the most important flag, which would be responsible for the accuracy of your data and the analytics function of it, which we are going to look at shortly, is increment by. So this function essentially says, are we incrementing the numeric values? So when it's set to true, whatever exists previously is going to be incremented by whatever value is over here or whatever value is over here. And when we set it to false, whatever exists is going to be overwritten by what exists here and what exists here. So in cases where you would want to overwrite, there might be cases you want to override, but a lot of times what most people would want to do is increment. So for example, if I was to do a game, I could create a game where we actually just overwrite the high score, and then we use this as the high score. So metric 1 becomes the high score. We can say metric 2 is the kill count. Metric 3 would be the death count. So just an example of that. And then increment in that scenario would be false, because you don't want to increment high scores, right? You want to overwrite high scores. But in this case, because we're talking about visit count, and the visit count should typically increment as you go on, we are setting the increment to true. So anyways, that essentially covers this client file that serves as the backbone for every Open Cider request. Now to go into exactly how that is leveraged in the application, you can see for this first place, we actually have this function. So what we're doing here is simply saying, first of all, just a little view if, where we say if auth is not valid, we're saying get started, and if auth is valid, we are saying login. This is very redundant. Obviously, we can actually do this instead because the other one is redundant. But that's what we're doing. And then obviously the same thing applies for the if as well. The OTP, we want to make sure we're not showing the OTP input until we need to, i.e. until the authentication is valid. So let's go up and see actually what this valid authentication looks like. So this is exactly what happens. It's initially set to false, so which means we would actually get a get started, and that is important because the functions that are being called are actually different. So when auth is not valid, we call the initialize auth, and when auth is valid, we call complete auth, i.e. validate, which we have referenced in the client file. So now we go into the methods just to see what we're doing. So in the methods, we're saying initialize auth, and we pass it the email address that has obviously been v-modeled from this input file, this input tag. And once this has been completed successfully, then we are actually setting it to the result. Now, if you remember correctly from this, the expectation is a Boolean, right? So if this was successfully accepted, the Boolean should be true, which means once this becomes true, the function that is going to be called on button press changes. Also, the OTP number field appears. It's just a simple little trick that we can use to quickly get this up and running. Obviously, now we move on to complete auth. For complete auth, we're supplying the OTP, and then once we supply the OTP, the same process applies. This is obviously going to be a Boolean value, and then if it's a successful Boolean value, then we actually just push that to the dashboard, so we reroute them to the dashboard. But if it's not a successful Boolean value, then we do a console log. We just tell them something went wrong. Obviously, you can customize this to suit your needs, but that's what we're doing at the moment. And now for the dashboard view, what is happening is on mounted, we are fetching the details. So now fetching the details should call the fetch details function from the client. And then once we do that successfully, how we check to make sure everything is fine is we see if the username equals an empty string. And if it's equal to an empty string, it means we haven't successfully collected the user details, so we will route them back to auth so that they can re-log in to complete this process. If the details have been collected successfully, we do this, which is basically saying we get summary data. So if you recall, here there's an update, which means whenever there is an authentication, there is an increment of the visit count. Whenever there is an authentication, there is an increment of the XP as well. So what we're doing on the dashboard is we're simply now pulling the information we have stored in the summary data API. And that is essentially how you would get this to work. So going back to the dashboard, that is why you would see the visit count being set to 4 and this being set to 60. Obviously, because we're using PNI, imagine if we refresh it, all the details are lost. So we have to re-log in. So we're just going to do that one more time, just to show you exactly what would happen. And then we log in successfully, and we should see that the visit count has indeed grown, which is important to see. So obviously this is how you would complete authentication. Once again, this is also the documentation should you need to go into details of how it works. I think it's important to mention that there is actually a simpler way of authenticating the application using SSO. So you can look at the documentation to kind of understand what you need to do and how you need to write it. Also, this is going to serve as an excellent quick start for you to get started quickly and just understand exactly how it works. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. You can literally copy this client file and just use that exactly and just tweak it a bit to suit your own personal needs. And as always, this link is going to be available in the description as well, so you can check that out so that you use that to get started quickly. Now, to look at the benefits, one of the benefits, or the most important benefit, is the introduction of transparent activity logs. So if you look at this, you can see we have completed a couple of transactions just today. We have done a couple of transactions today. What we did was we authenticated successfully twice, and in that process, the breakdown of that process included service auth, as well as get document and update of the summary data. Now we can see exactly these activities. As users, we see that on the dashboard. Now, why that is truly beneficial to the user is it creates a sense of trust, and not a trust that is blindly placed. It creates trust because we have this immutable activity log with inspirations from blockchain that helps you to actually see what has been done to your data. And this is also downloadable as a CSV. You can actually just choose to download it, and it becomes available to you as a CSV for you to do whatever you want as a user, because it is your data. Another thing to note, this actually applies to the profile updates as well, so you can see exactly what state your profile was in before and now. And something else to note is when you are looking at the service, you actually are able to see, first of all, top line information as a user. All this information I see, all this information on your screen right now is available to myself as a user. That's an important distinction. So as a user, I can see my visit counts without even needing to go into the application. Things like this are what make Open Cider stand out from the rest. So imagine if I was to say, for example, build a game. I'm using a game example because there's a lot of game ideas in my head, and the next example we are going to be looking at is going to be a game. But imagine I built a game. I would be able to see, say, for example, kill count and death count, or my high score and point earned, or something like that. So things like that, I'm able to see that top level without even needing to get into the application just for that information, as well as details specific to this application. So I can see, for example, I can check out the official website, and also see the activity logs specific to this service as opposed to the other ones. Now, one last important thing to show for the user dashboard is permissions. So permissions are a way for myself as a user to say what I want applications to access. So basically, I can say, I don't want this application to access my avatar. I don't want this application to access my email. I don't want this application to access my username. And we're going to put that to the test just right now. So what we've done here is, on removing this, we have set the avatar to have no access. So basically, the Hello app has no access to my avatar, can't read and can't write it. I would advise against allowing any application to write your details unless you fully trust the application. So anyways, we're going to update this, and we're going to complete a test just to show you exactly what that looks like. So when we get back to the demo app, the expectation is when I reload this, I should not be able to see this. So firstly, on reload, we would have to do a relogin. So avatar should be blank. And it is, because now we have revoked access for the Hello World app. And obviously the visit count has grown as well. So features like this are why you should use Open Cider, because you care about the users, because you're able to prototype quickly, because you're able to put power back into the hands of the users. And it's not just the users as well. There is a dev dashboard where you get to see important information. So for example, this is the dev dashboard. We're going to make a mental note to hide this one, hide every email. Having said that, with this dev dashboard, I can see exactly what the daily calls look like. So beyond just giving me access to the same immutable activities, all parties are actually privy to the activity logs. Beyond just giving me that as well, it also shows me the daily traffic. So just on login, I'm able to gain insight into the daily traffic. This is the number of requests that have been made today. These are the applications that we currently have. So firstly, this is the Hello World app that we are currently dealing with. This is Boards app, which is a project management tool that I would recommend you check out to scope out your projects. And this is avatars for people who would like to use custom NFTs as their avatars, as opposed to what we currently have. So we're just going to go into the Hello app just so you see details, right? So first of all, as I mentioned earlier, you can see all the same information that the user can see. You can see all of that. That's the first thing. The second thing to note is we're seeing the total number of users as well. So here I can see we have one user, and this is the amount of calls that have been made since the inception of the app. We're also able to see more relevant stuff like the visit count and the XP. So if we were to just close this out, so we see just the XP, we can see 2 days ago, the visit count was 3. So this value is typically an aggregate of whatever, all the summary data for every user that you have. So in this case, it's just one user, and the value was 3. And then we move on to today, where the value is 6, which corresponds with the information we have here. So if we had 2 users, for example, or 3, and they all had like 5, 5, 5, that would be 15. And then on aggregate, it will be 15 divided by 3, which would go back to 5. So that's kind of how that works. As well as for the XP, you get to also see that information. So this is essentially the value proposition of Open Cider. You're able to integrate quickly. You're able to integrate to a platform that provides user sovereignty for your users, thereby creating trust for you as an application. and you're able to integrate with a platform that provides you with all these insights so you make better app decisions. So once again, this is going to be in the description. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Can you hit the like, subscribe, share it with your fellow developers. The next video we should be getting into would be creating a game in Unity 3D. So make sure you subscribe and stay tuned for that one.